Hello, my name is David Sutterth. I'm an adult neurologist. I am the host of the TBI Neurologist. My guest today is Dr. Fernando Gomez-Pinilla. Dr. Gomez-Pinilla is a professor at the David Geffen School of Medicine. He is also the director of the Neurotrophic Research Lab. Dr. Gomez-Pinilla is published in many journals and textbooks, including Nature Journal. I came across the work of our guest approximately 3 years ago when I was training, when I was preparing for my TBI boards. So since that time, I've used that chapter as a guiding light for helping my patients with traumatic brain injuries to organize their lifestyle to promote healing. Dr. Gomez-Pinilla is trained at the University of Chile, an undergraduate degree and master's degree. His graduate degree is from, or his PhD is from UCLA, where he finished his postdoc. Dr. Gomez-Pinilla, welcome.
Okay, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to.
Okay, I think we're going to generate a lot of questions tonight, so I have to ask you to come back already. So we're going to start a little bit. If you could just tell us how you got into the field of brain science.
Yeah, always I've been fascinated by the brain, isn't it? Because the brain is at the center of what we are, isn't it? Because of the brain, we can do practically everything that we do anytime, and also the brain has been a strong target of evolution for thousands and thousands of years, isn't it? That have been evolving, and all the capacity that we have these days actually is very much related to this interaction between the brain and the environment, and that's determine the causes of many diseases, isn't it? Our capacity to cope with accident or injuries, isn't it? And so basically, as I said, the brain is the most fascinating organ in the body for me. So.
Well, as a neurologist, I will not disagree. One of the things that I find extremely interesting in your writings is your frequent mentioning of systems biology. I think the time has come for systems biology. Could you give us a sketch of what that means to you and how it helps you organize your approach to the issues you're studying?
Yeah, system biology is, in the reality, is the main meaning is how all the organs in the body interact with each other, isn't it? And in order to have a function. And I said the brain is very important, but certainly the brain is one organ, and the brain connects with many different organs in the body. And in the reality, the most fascinating thing is like all organs work together, isn't it? And the brain is the main director of all the organs, and is the one that they control interactions and everything. So when we talk about system biology, we are thinking about the question is how all of these organs interact with each other, and we can study many times separately, but in the reality, is all of them are important for function.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think brain injuries is one of the very best examples of that principle. Now, we're going to be talking a lot about traumatic brain injury today. That's going to be our focus. Well, we may discuss some other things that also interest you, such as depression and Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases. So I think that our concept of traumatic brain injury is evolving very much. Just 20 years ago, we believed that a mild traumatic brain injury or concussion was a simple thing in a couple of weeks to months. 85 to 90% of the people would be better, back to their usual activities, and that it was an isolated brain phenomenon, that a brain injury was a brain injury, and that didn't really have much to do with other organs, the heart, the gut, for example. So do you feel that our concept of traumatic brain injury is changing?
Yeah, no question, certainly changing. And these days, the NIH is very interested in trying to learn how the brain interact with many organs, isn't it? And indeed, a lot of the aspects of the pathology that is created by the traumatic brain injury happen in the gut. Actually, we have a extremely interesting data results of experiment and in animal models, but actually clinicians know well, isn't it, that the patients that have been suffering traumatic brain injury can develop some liver disease or heart disease, and actually that can make the pathology that we think is in the brain actually is in the liver. Actually, I mean, just to give you an example, isn't it, like the liver and many other organs actually, but the liver is the one that synthesizes proteins, lipids that go to the brain, and without that, actually, we cannot live. So basically, the concept is changing in terms of how we can understand the whole concept of traumatic brain injury these days.
Do you believe that a larger portion than, say, 50% of the mild traumatic brain injuries continue to have problems for several years?
Yeah, certainly. And that's I mean, we know already, isn't it, that clinically that's is known that, and the best example perhaps, isn't it, is what we all of us have heard in sport, isn't it, like a traumatic brain injury that occurs in football players or boxers, and that the people thought, I mean, years ago, that they were totally cured, but in years later, they commit suicide or they develop several other diseases like Alzheimer or dementia or isn't it, Parkinson, and these are extreme cases, but in the lower scale, it's known also, like, for example, in students, for example, teenagers, after traumatic brain injury, many people lower their grades in the school, and they have some cognitive problems, and so it's something, isn't it, is that lasts much longer than we originally thought.
Yeah, those are very good points. And often these people who are declared as being cured or back to the usual condition, they will appear later in alcohol clinics. They may commit suicide. They're getting divorced. They're unemployable. So we need to catch these people early and get them along the right track. One of the things that keeps cropping up in neurodegenerative diseases, depression, and especially TBI is the issue of inflammation. Do you think inflammation is involved? And if it is, can you give us some ideas of a practical nature to help us deal with this problem?
Yeah, inflammation is a very broad concept, isn't it? That also involves the body. I mean, in many ways, inflammation that we have in the brain also come from the body. So I mentioned to you, for example, the proteins and lipids that are synthesized in the liver, for example. The first aspect of the reaction come from the peripheries, and it come from some type of liver disease, and these molecules go to the brain, and you, I mean, we continue developing the pathology in the brain, and it's a double-sided situation, because as I said, the periphery, the gut, start a lot of this reaction, but later on, when it goes to the brain, we have a double-sided situation, because the brain response is to affect the periphery again. So there is a circle, a vicious circle that can last for a long time. So that's so I think it's what is changing these days, that in order to understand the brain pathology, we need to understand this interaction, and just not to mention, isn't it, all this field of microbiota, isn't it? I mean, about a lot of the bacteria which we have in the in the body, isn't it, are making a lot of products related to inflammation, and that's also is affected by traumatic brain injury. So, I mean, there are so many different components.
Yeah. Okay. So another term that we hear often in traumatic brain injury is oxidative stress. What role does that play, and how can we deal with that?
Yeah, oxidative stress also is a broad concept, like inflammation. In the way that I started understanding the oxidative stress years ago, always I try to imagine what happened in the car, in the engine. Isn't it? Oxidative stress actually happens when the combustion, I mean, energy process are not working well. So, and that's happened, I mean, more commonly in old cars, isn't it, that the process of burning gas was not working well, and there was a lot of fumes and that type of things. That's the idea of oxidative stress. So when the energy producing system in the body is the mitochondria, and when the mitochondria is not burning properly the fuels, isn't it, start developing a lot of these free radicals that are the main component of oxidative stress. So, and these free radicals are very damaging, because they can affect so many different processes in the body and brain, and it's like there is also a very strong connection with inflammation that we just discussed, isn't it? Like these are general processes that affect practically any function, and has been connected to traumatic brain injury and Alzheimer's disease and many diseases.
So how can diet and exercise affect oxidative stress?
Yeah, that's exactly, it's a great question and connection, because the so when I was talking about fuels, isn't it? When I said that when the cars burn the fuels, that's the role of diet and exercise, isn't it? When we eat, we are providing energy and fuels to the cells. So what it means actually, if we put too much fuel that the mitochondria cannot process, that's when the smoke start coming, isn't it, in the car, isn't it, like and that's producing this oxidative stress. And in the case of exercise is the one that produces the balance. So exercise, what it does is to balance the burning of the fuels. So what it does, actually, the excess of fuels are burned by exercise, which actually exercise is a very homeostatic type of brain or body process, isn't it? Because it works under very homeostatic conditions, isn't it? That it keep the balance, in other words, isn't it, in many of the molecular reactions, and that's how we heal ourselves.
Do you think that we can facilitate reducing the oxidative stress by taking any specific supplements?
Yes, yeah, certainly. That's we also know. Certainly, yes. Particularly supplements related to flavonoids, for example. We know flavonoids are very strong in terms of reducing oxidative stress. There are several supplements that are good to promote a balance in the mitochondria, isn't it? In the way that we burn fuels and can reduce reactive oxygen species, isn't it? That they are related to this. So for all of this, I mean, we have all of these antioxidants. As I mentioned, the flavonoids, most of them are a very strong antioxidant, and they are amazing. Some of them, we published a small study a few years ago, using blueberries, for example. And it's incredible, isn't it, the power to promote, isn't it, I mean, to reduce oxidative stress in the brain and the body. And so anyway, it's very, very effective way to do it.
So you're thinking of Resveratrol, for example, I think, right?
Yes.
What about NAC? Would you recommend using that? That's which will be converted to glutathione, which you can't really take effectively orally.
Yeah, that's another thing I was going to mention. Yeah, NAC actually is we have been studying this also for a while, and in models of Alzheimer's disease, and together with blueberries, one of the best that I've seen so far. I am not taking it myself, but if I had to take it, it's something that I would take, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to come back to supplements if you don't mind. So we talked about the gut, which is a big thing. Let's move upstairs. Let's talk about the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And can you kind of give us in broad strokes how that can be affected in traumatic brain injury?
Yeah, in many situations of traumatic brain injury, the hypothalamus is affected, and the can be affected, isn't it, in a very direct way or indirectly. And after the hypothalamus is affected, the hypothalamus is at the base of the brain, in very strong connection to the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland is the one that produces all the hormones that go to the body through the circulation. So once the hypothalamus is affected, isn't it, all the hormones are affected, and that's another aspect of traumatic brain injury, because I mean, once the hormonal status is affected, I mean, practically everything can be compromised, isn't it? I mean, many different aspects of body function can be compromised, and also the HPA axis is in connection practically to everything, isn't it? Even going a little bit far, for example, with psychiatric disorders or cognitive disorders. So that's something, isn't it? Like we need to be aware of this, and there have been several studies depending on the problem related to the hypothalamus pituitary. For example, treatment using growth hormone, for example, have been shown to produce some relief in some cases in which the hypothalamus pituitary system is affected. But as I said, it's a very broad topic, because there are so many hormones. There are like 6 or 7 axes, isn't it, that they control the body.
Yeah, well, the pituitary itself is very, very vulnerable given its circulation and location. So these derangements of pituitary function are often missed. I think it was described over 100 years ago this could happen, yet I think it's not something that's commonly addressed. I do a pituitary panel on all of my patients with TBI. I tend to do them fairly early. Do you think it is something that should be done early and repeated in 6 months, or do you have? Can you give clinicians any guidelines about when to test for pituitary function after TBI?
Yeah, so I mean, there are many different cases. In some cases, I mean, as I said, depending on the conditions. There are some conditions that can last for a long time, but depending on the intensity of the lesion, maybe mild condition. So, but it's something. I mean, it's not that difficult to find out, because there are very good assays to look at the hormonal status, isn't it? So we can learn very easily, isn't it, by just having a hormonal profile. I mean, it's easier than other things.
Yeah, true enough. For example, this would lead us into the subject of Bdnf. How do we check that? I know that that's one of your special interests. In fact, Bdnf is a neurotrophin, and that is what you call your lab, I think, the Neurotrophic Research Center. So Bdnf and brain injury, it's a big subject. Can you give us a short background of its importance and how we maybe could in some way stimulate it?
Bdnf is an extremely interesting molecule coming from different perspectives. Because of the first thing is like a Bdnf was discovered that it's a trophic factor. It's a neurotrophic factor that is produced in the brain by neurons and other cells. And and actually, Bdnf has been very important in my career because the knowledge about Bdnf has evolved, I mean, very smoothly along my path. And so when I was a student many years ago, we learned that Bdnf was a trophic factor and that helps survival and growth of cells and everything. But later on, and I was part of the discovery process of this. So we found actually that Bdnf is more than a trophic factor, also can act as a neurotransmitter. So it can help the communication between cells. So at the synapse. And this was very interesting because of practically everything that is brain function occurs very importantly at the synaptic level, because the synaptic level is the communication between two cells, and cells need to communicate to each other. And the communication is the mostly affected in many functions, isn't it? For example, for learning, it's very important how cells communicate. So then it was discovered that this Bdnf is related to synaptic function. So then from there, we discovered like Bdnf, because of the same reason, was very important for learning and memory. Isn't it? It was one of the most important molecules to regulate learning, cognition, and at the same time, practically, we started working on exercise, and we discovered for the first time, we reported this in Nature many years ago with Carl Kottman, that exercise was acting on the brain by regulating Bdnf. So it was practically very interesting, the whole thing, because so we have exercise, isn't it, that I am talking about 1995 or 98, that, I mean, no one thought that exercise could affect the brain. I mean, people thought the exercise, it was just good for muscle. And so, but anyway, now we have the exercise was able to help cognitive function, learning and memory because of Bdnf. So then Bdnf has been growing, and later on it was found like Bdnf was very important, or the lack of Bdnf was very important for the pathology. I mean, on many diseases, isn't it, like Alzheimer or schizophrenia and depression, and many diseases actually were related to a low in Bdnf, and still is growing, isn't it? I'm still working on Bdnf. The NIH actually funded a big study here in my lab to continue studying Bdnf in exercise. But we are studying now a small molecule that is similar to Bdnf, which is called DHF, D-hydroxyflavone, which actually is very similar to a flavonoid in extractor, isn't it? But the particular thing of this is a small molecule that it can go to the brain, so we can eat it, and and that's what's has been one of the problems of Bdnf, because Bdnf is a big molecule that it has been difficult to develop as a therapy because of the same reason. It's a big molecule that doesn't go easily into the brain, but we have these small molecules, so hopefully we get good results. Actually, we got good results already in animals, but I mean, and there are people trying to develop DHF for human studies.
Now, are you talking about 7,8 dihydroxyflavone?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, good. All right. So that is a direct agonist that it actually attaches itself to the, I think the TREC receptor. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, there's an alternative small molecule also. I can't remember the name of it that I think stimulated Bdnf. It has a similar name. I'm sorry, I forgot it. Oh no, it was heptamethoxyflavone.
Yeah, there is another similar like R13 is another one. They also act through the DHF. So as I said, these are small molecules that have been found very effective. So we are looking at now in more detail, for example, how affect the functional MRI pattern after traumatic brain injury and many, and also how can connect to exercise because of so for example, patients that they receive therapy after traumatic brain injury, so many times they cannot exercise properly. So the idea is how to combine the two for a better results.
Are there any other activities that will increase BDNF? I mean, for example, brain stimulation. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about neuromodulation. Do you think that maybe deep brain stimulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation, or near infrared phototherapy may have an effect on BDNF?
Yeah, certainly. I've been learning more about this. And I've been surprised, isn't it? Because some people have developed a lot of this. This potential therapy, and there seem to be extremely efficient. And I think the mechanisms are not very well understood, but I wouldn't be surprised like they can act through Bdnf as well, because many of these involve brain activity, and the and Bdnf is actually enhanced by brain stimulation. So then I wouldn't be surprised like Bdnf is very much related to this.
Let's talk a little bit about genetics. Let's stay on the subject of Bdnf. Now, Bdnf is a gene that's susceptible to epigenetic changes. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Could you describe epigenetics briefly and tell me how that affects the Bdnf gene?
Yeah, epigenetics is extremely interesting because basically, by definition, these are changes at the gene level that are not directly related to mutations. So this is basically the idea is like the function of the gene can be affected, isn't it, by some of the accessories system to the gene. But the important thing that a lot of these changes through epigenetics can be saved. Can be saved for years, isn't it? And even there are very provocative studies like these changes can be transgenerational. They can go across generations, and which actually open an incredible line of thought, isn't it? Like that a lot of these changes actually can be transmitted to the next generation. But in terms of BDNF, the most interesting thing is like, so the BDNF gene can be regulated by changes in the methylation, for example, and histone acetylation, and we showed that some years ago in around exercise. So basically, it means promoting these epigenetic changes in the gene. The BDNF is sort of the effect of BDNF can be sort of programmed, isn't it, in a longer term, isn't it? Like so a lot of things like we are talking that can be produced at a young age. A lot of these changes potentially can be saved when we age, isn't it? And so what it means, like by taking care of ourselves at a certain age, we may be able to save these changes, isn't it, for later on. So so basically, that's the main idea of the epigenetics, isn't it? I mean, it's one of the most interesting areas because it can explain a lot of things in terms of how we change, isn't it, across years. And we never thought about this before.
Yeah, I've started using some gene testing in my TBI patients, and what I'm finding is that some of them have an unfortunate allele in the BDNF gene. They have, I think it is the Val66 MET, which means that they start out behind the 8-ball in terms of BDNF production. Anything that we could do about that, or is it even a good idea to try to identify these people? Does it have any practical consequence?
Yeah, certainly there are studies because you can actually profile I mean these genomic changes in people, isn't it? That's very well known now. And actually, there are many ways to profile the genome of people, and we can know exactly who is that person, isn't it? In terms of having these changes at the genetic level of the BDNF, and from there, I don't know exactly how to fix this, but I would assume that if that may also be connected, isn't it, or can be a way, for example, by using these drugs like DHF or other type of drugs in order to compensate for these problems in the BDNF function.
Well, if you listen to George Church, the geneticist at Harvard, it sounds like at some point in the future, we might be able to replace the unhealthy BDNF gene with the wild type. Do you think that will be possible someday?
Yeah, certainly. It's amazing. I mean, all this advance at the genomic level, isn't it, in terms of gene replacement and also, isn't it, how some genes can be incorporated into the genome, isn't it, in certain regions. The brain is more difficult, but a lot of this is already being done, isn't it, in the body, isn't it, in terms of, I mean, gene replacement, and but but as I said, it's scary what can be done, isn't it, at the genomic or genetic level, because I mean, we have the capacity to do it now, but a lot of these research needs a lot of permission, because for example, you propose a study like that to the NIH, it's because of religious, religion and many things, isn't it? People would question that, isn't it? Like studying fetus and all of this type of research.
Okay. Now, I remember reading an article. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find it. And it was an article that compared recovery from traumatic injuries from soldiers active today compared to the soldiers active 40 to 50 years ago, say in the Vietnamese conflict. And the authors of this paper promoted the idea that in those days, in the old days, people got better faster and they improved completely. So a possible reason for that is that we're starting out with unhealthy brains. What do you think about that?
Yeah, certainly that's extremely important. Yeah, and that's what you mentioned also in terms of the military is a major change, isn't it? That we know. I mean, these days, most of the soldiers who get damaged at war, and it's amazing, they can reach a medical center within 20 minutes, isn't it? Because of the transportation, isn't it? By helicopters and everything. So most of the people are treated very quickly, which was different 2 years ago, isn't it? That most of the people stay up front and that's something very important in the field of traumatic injury is how quick the patient can reach a medical center, isn't it, in order to do things which are not that extremely sophisticated in terms of genetic, or it's just simply, isn't it, just treating the patient in terms of reducing compression or something, isn't it, in the wound, or something, isn't it, that when it's done very quickly, it has extremely good results, which was totally different, as I said, what happened years ago. And also what you mentioned also in terms of the nutrition these days also is different to happen many years ago. I've been in meetings with the Institute of Medicine or other, and in which they have been discussing nutrition, isn't it? And certainly, I mean, the soldier these days, isn't it, is much better taken care of in terms of nutrition, and we can think of also in terms of recovery is something very well connected to this, isn't it? So so I would say, isn't it, that a lot of the concept that we discussed already, can be applied to the soldier today, and I can see also the military is always looking for ways to treat the patient very quickly, isn't it? To have devices like can be applied within minutes after the injury.
One thing, maybe one of the reasons that people don't recover from traumatic brain injury is often because they are overweight and they're insulin resistant. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's something important. What you mentioned, unfortunately, is another factor that happened at the level of many societies, and particularly our society, is related to the quality of eating. Because a lot of the diets are very much into calories, sugars, isn't it? And that's very well known already in terms of particularly type of sugar, like fructose, for example, that is the most prevalent sugar, isn't it, in beverage these days, can act to create this condition that you mentioned, isn't it, insulin resistance, diabetes, which actually we know these days is pretty bad in terms of reducing the capacity for healing in many organs and the brain, and the obesity is one of the main problems, isn't it, in our society, and also something extremely important that is not traumatic brain injury per se, but what we have seen at the pandemic is in the pandemic. I mean, the 60 or 70% of the people who have died, isn't it, of the COVID-19, are people, I mean, are minorities, but it's not because they are genetically different. The minorities, because of the nutrition, has been different, and that's what we call these health disparities, isn't it? And we have seen it, I mean, very dramatically for the case of the COVID-19, like people most affected, and we know already that diabetes has been, obesity, isn't it, has been one of the main risk factors for people dying from the COVID-19. So the same thing happened, isn't it, if we try to understand in diseases and brain damage, isn't it, traumatic brain injury or Alzheimer disease. I mean, a lot of people say that it's the type 3 diabetes because of the same reason, isn't it? Because of the problem with the manage of glucose in the brain and the body.
Now, a lot of my patients with traumatic brain injury are very depressed. Some clinicians feel that the depression is something that is a reaction to an unfortunate situation. I certainly think that is certainly possible. But with the things you've discussed, it would appear that there's an obvious, very clear biological substrate for depression in someone with a traumatic brain injury. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, certainly. That's certainly I agree, and it's totally correct in terms of traumatic brain injury, that this damage to the brain translates into psychiatric disorder, depression, particularly anxiety disorders as well, and that's what and in order to understand that, we need to put practically all of what we have been talking about, because basically one of the main issues about traumatic brain injury that even if we have a focal lesion, still the whole brain is affected, isn't it? Because of we have some type of diffuse damage, and basically the brain is weaker, and we are not able to cope properly, and that's very much connected to depressive stages, and we can mention again Bdnf. Low Bdnf has been related to depression, and we said Bdnf also has been shown to be reduced in traumatic and injury patients. So the psychiatric disorder is a big issue, and we can now, for what we know, a lot of these psychiatric disorders are also metabolic disorders, isn't it? We know, for example, obesity also has a strong effect on depression, isn't it? So as I said, there are many factors contributing to this. So and in order to control this, one way to go is based on what we have been discussing already. Exercise, for example, is known to be one of the best ways to reduce depression. The problem is when people are depressed, they don't want to exercise. So
true.
That's what I.
Yeah. Could you comment on the importance of tryptophan in recovering from a TBI?
Yeah, certainly tryptophan. I think the main issue here is in the synthesis of neurotransmitters, like serotonin, for example, isn't it? And so I think it's I mean, there are studies, isn't it, like under certain circumstances, isn't it, some patient can be deficient in tryptophan, isn't it, and but I haven't heard that it's used as a generalized therapy, isn't it, just for certain cases.
No, I wasn't suggesting as a therapy, but with stress and inflammation, sometimes the pathway can be diverted to the kynurenine pathway to quinoic acid, and that can be, I think, neurotoxic.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think so, but that's what I think I mean, all of these are difficult to treat because pharmacologically we can divert pathways also. So I am very cautious when we are talking about this, because sometimes, yeah, when you can unbalance a lot of things by trying to balance.
One thing that we did not talk about is DHA. Could you comment on how that might impact the recovering brain?
DHA?
DHA.
DHA. Yeah, DHA is one of the prototypes of brain food, because and we studied this for many years, actually, because it's an omega-3 fatty acid, and just to be brief, the beauty of this, when we talk about brain food, DHA, actually, it is a brain food. It's not that we say, because actually it's like a brick. It's part of the brain. I mean, it's because the membranes of neurons of all cells, they are lipids, and DHA is part of the lipidic composition of brain cells, keep the neurons and other cells functioning, because of the membrane have to be fluid enough to communicate and many things. So, and the lack of DHA can create a lot of problems because of the same reason. And one of the problems is, for example, for people who eat too much saturated fat. So I mean, this fat, saturated fat, can replace, for example, the lipidic composition and make the situation worse, isn't it? Make communication between the cells worse. But the good thing of DHA that as I said, can keep neurons functional. Functional, and not only neurons, many cells, and also DHA has been found to be antioxidant, have to be that help the immune system, help practically everything is in it. The DHA helps, and I haven't seen any side effect like can be problematic. So the DHA certainly is extremely positive for most purposes.
There are a lot of similarities between traumatic brain injury and accelerated aging. If you listen to David Sinclair, he recommends using nicotinamide riboside. Do you think that might play a positive role in treating traumatic brain injuries?
Yeah, that's that's when we were talking about NAT, isn't it? That all of these are so the mitochondria, again, like any energy system, isn't it? Like is the engine of the brain. So so the energy produced by the mitochondria, affect everything. And this nicotinamide riboside has been found actually seem to be very important, isn't it, for supporting many of the reaction, particularly during aging, because during aging, the energy producing system in the body and the brain is the first one affected, isn't it? These drugs actually, or these molecules, I should say, seem to be very effective in normalizing the mitochondrial function. And once that happens, practically everything is affected. And one of the things is, when we are talking about aging, this is particularly important, isn't it? Because in aging, one of the main problem is the energy production, managing of energy. It's like the same example that I gave you with the old cars, isn't it? The old cars, now they are totally computerized, but we're talking about 20 years ago. The old cars were, the first thing when it was they emit a lot of fumes, isn't it? Smoke and all of that, and same idea, isn't it, with the brain, isn't it? So these mitochondria activators are very, very important.
Okay. One of the things that people are researching in the field of Alzheimer's is problems with the blood-brain barrier. And we know that the blood-brain barrier is often damaged in traumatic brain injury, and in some cases never heals. Now, this could possibly be something that allows toxins to enter the brain that may cause exacerbation of traumatic brain injury. We also know that ApoE4 individuals have difficulty repairing their blood-brain barrier. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, certainly the blood-brain barrier is extremely important because it keeps the brain isolated from a lot of toxicity. And so once the blood-brain barrier is broken, a lot of toxic waste can go into the body. And one of the main problem is the brain is immune protected, isn't it? And once there is a breakdown of the blood-brain barrier, for example, there can be a lot of immune molecules that goes inside the brain, and that's something related to an early topic that we discussed, inflammation.
Correct.
So when we said the inflammation, so what happened, for example, microglia, that is a very tiny cell which is in the brain, has been related to inflammation, isn't it? And microglia, for example, these cells originally are developed in the body, in the periphery, so they are part of the immune system. So but in the way that they go to the brain, normally it's a process that is very well controlled under normal circumstances. And that can be a problem. For example, if there is a breakdown of the blood-brain barrier, there can be an increase in inflammation because the microglia and also you mentioned ApoE. Also, ApoE is another issue because also largely is produced in the periphery, in the liver as well. So what I'm saying, when we break the blood-brain barrier, practically, I mean, we disrupt this dysfunctional interaction between the body and the brain in terms of a lot of molecules that there shouldn't be in the brain.
Right. Now you mentioned diet, you mentioned exercise. I don't recall you having mentioned sleep in your work. Do you regard that as an important feature in recovering from a traumatic brain injury?
To have done what? Just
to sleep properly. Sleep.
Sweet.
Sleep. Dormir.
Sweet
Sleep.
diet.
No, sleep. I'm sorry. I don't. To sleep. Sleeping. Proper sleeping is important for brain recovery.
No, I am not. I maybe don't understand, but I don't.
Dormir.
I sleep.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I thought you were talking about the molecule. Yeah. Yeah, certainly sleep. Yeah, certainly sleep. It's the same thing that we have been discussing, like exercise and everything. Now, what we know about sleep. Again, the mitochondria
right.
It come to play in the mitochondria because of it has been known for this is new information actually, that certainly a lot of the molecules that are related to sleep, they are very much related to metabolism. I mean, and there is a whole becoming a big area of research now, try to understand, isn't it, how sleep can affect the rest of the brain. So in other words, a lot of the things that I said for exercise can also apply to sleep. So sleep have been found, isn't it, to be a very important modulator of molecules like Bdnf, for example, or so the lack of sleep can be very problematic because can also unbalance a lot of the biochemistry that I mentioned in the brain. So so therapy, I mean, it's one of the therapy. Just sleeping therapy actually is one of the main factors, isn't it, for the overall healing.
Okay, we're winding down. Just a couple more questions. It's such a privilege to be able to ask you these questions. You also mentioned curcumin very often.
Yeah, curcumin, same idea as the antioxidant. So curcumin is a very strong antioxidant, and it's very effective, isn't it, for regulation of the immune system. So and that's as you know, it's very prevalent in Indian food, isn't it? So so as I said, most of the thing what I said already for reduction of inflammation and reducing oxidative stress, curcumin has been extremely important, and also something new to add when we are talking about diet. A lot of these separate compounds seem to work together. For example, we published years ago that the combination of curcumin and DHA seem to be very effective, much more effective than both of them by separate. So then when you combine these things, and also it's really delicious. I mean, like if you eat fish, isn't it, with turmeric, isn't it, that curcumin actually is a good combination in terms of taste.
I think in one of your studies, you said that supplementing with curcumin 3 weeks before the brain injury, of course, we're talking about animals here, can reduce the size of the injury.
Yeah, certainly. That's one of the issues about the curcumin, because it promotes protection. So it protects the brain, and that's also something very important. The protection, isn't it, by managing diet and exercise, our brain becomes stronger, isn't it, in terms of potential problem that we can have, and that is amazing, because always I've seen this, that we are always under threat. I mean, and that's why when we try to understand pathology or etiology, I mean, our brain and body are being threat always, I would say 24 hours a day. And the reason why we don't get sick, and maybe we will never get sick, isn't it? And it's because the protection, isn't it? It's because of we have a lot of, we are almost ready to go, isn't it? And all of this work that we have done sometimes in the past, isn't it, seem to help. But as I said, I mean, living healthy is like walking in a jungle, isn't it? Like there are animals that are trying to, I mean, eat us, isn't it? And by modulating the diet, isn't it? We are much stronger, isn't it, in terms of all these eventualities.
Right. So we mentioned several very important supplements. We said DHA, curcumin, 7-H-dihydroxyflavone. So can you think of any important supplements, quercetin, or any others that we haven't talked about that you would regard as being very important?
I think we mentioned most of them. We mentioned NAD, this NADs in it, and the other that you mentioned already. I think these are a good representative. But I think something important to consider. We cannot put everything in one supplement. So so I think for me, I think it's more important the concept that it's the combination of things, isn't it? And so I think the ideal supplement is try to have a good combination of several of these, isn't it? That can be good antioxidant, can be good mitochondrial activators, isn't it, the anti-inflammatory, and can help the membranes in the brain, like DHA, and so I think it's more important the combination, and also exercise, isn't it? Sleep, many things together. So it's not only one thing.
I was instructed by a patient to ask you about alcohol.
Yeah, alcohol is, I think it's like everything. I mean, too much of a good thing is bad, isn't it? Alcohol in a small amount, I think, can be good in terms of, isn't it? You combine it with meals and
No, but I'm talking in the context of TBI. Some people say that you probably should not drink for 12 months, but you're saying if you do it in moderation, it might not be an issue.
Yeah, I think it's, as I said, depends on the moderation. Because, I mean, I haven't seen any study saying like alcohol in a small amount, isn't it? I mean, just having a glass of wine with the food. I mean, it's good for many things, and also it's something important we need to think in terms of happiness, isn't it? Like, I mean, one of the main factor in all of these, and we also sometimes we say that the science of happiness, I think, is one of the main factors for fighting many diseases, isn't it? To be happy, and isn't it? And so, as I said, it's not just to reduce or totally eliminate things. It just is the amount, is the one that is important.
Well, my patient will be very pleased to hear that he can have an occasional alcoholic beverage. And the happiness issue that you bring up, I think it's very important for people recovering from traumatic brain injuries, particularly social contacts. They need to be maintained, strengthened. People, often they will display sickness behavior after a TBI. That's the worst possible thing they can do. They need to get out and be with their friends, be with their family, pursue their pursuits to the extent that they're able.
Yeah, exactly. You said it, isn't it? It's I mean, to be happy is extremely important, and we study other diseases. I mean, particularly cancer, for example. Cancer, I mean, you ask any oncologist, the main problem, I mean, the main factor for people dying, like a lot of people are unhappy, they lose the battle too soon, for example. So so I think it's a socialization, all of these factors that you mentioned are extremely important. And now there are studies showing like I mean, there is a science behind, isn't it? All of these that one thing is to be happy and to have the will to heal, isn't it? Better and everything.
Very well said. If we can close, just two quick questions. What are you working on now? What can we look forward to hearing in the future from your lab?
Yeah, what we are doing now is we are doing a lot of genomic studies, and that's we have some project funded by the NIH to look at genes in cells affected by traumatic brain injury. But these are individual cells, isn't it? Most of the studies in the past, people have looked at a group of genes, isn't it? Because of they have done the studies in conglomerate of cells. But we are working with techniques, isn't it, that we can study gene expression in one cell, isn't it? And we are using system biology and bioinformatics to combine, isn't it, different cells and to have a sort of picture of the traumatic brain injury. Another thing which we are dedicating time to understand how the brain talks to the body. For me, is one of extremely fundamental question, because I've done a lot of studies in the past in diet, isn't it, in exercise, and so then and it's so and little by little I realized, like if we try to understand the effects on the brain, is the whole body that the one that is working together, isn't it? How the liver, for example, can affect the brain, and or how the certain diets can affect the brain by affecting the body. For example, we published many studies about the effect of sugar, for example, like fructose in the brain, like that is not good. But a lot of the negative effect of fructose actually occur in the body, isn't it, through the liver, for example, so then I am trying to understand, for example, how the gut, the intestine, for example, talk to the liver or talk to the adipose tissue, and in response to traumatic brain injury, and how this can affect the brain, and there is a circle reaction, isn't it? So that's what I think is, for me, is extremely fascinating, isn't it, is to understand this interaction, isn't it, how we can have a comprehensive picture, isn't it, for to understand pathologies, not only traumatic brain injury diseases like Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson and many other diseases.
Right. Well, I look forward to reading your studies. This is the point where I ask you to get out your crystal ball and predict the next 10 years in TBI medicine.
Yeah, it's the for all what I hear, in terms of TBI, one important factor will be prevention. You need to make the brain stronger, and there are several ideas like why this can happen, because the idea is, for one thing, is much cheaper for the economy, isn't it, to create ways to prevent diseases or to prevent, isn't it, the intensity of the pathology. So that there is a lot of effort by part of the NIH, isn't it, to understand better prevention. And another thing in terms of traumatic brain injury is also in connection with precision medicine. Because precision medicine does another thing that we didn't touch, that the people react very differently to different treatments, isn't it? Because of the genes are different for different people for many reasons that we also discussed, isn't it? So that's something also how we can understand about these differences and to create ways to individualize treatment of patients, isn't it? For example, why some treatment can be good for one patient but can be bad for the other patient. So the idea is try to have some better idea of the genes, isn't it, and the capacity of the genes, isn't it, to be treated by different treatments. And for that is one of the things that we are doing now is try to, what I mentioned in terms of the genomic studies, is try to create some basis for the individualized treatment. To learn why people react differently, and also we are trying to understand by using some models of individual variability to understand why, isn't it, there is this individual variability in different subjects that can make the treatment more complicated, isn't it? And how we can account for the variability to improve the treatment. So that's the precision medicine that, and that's actually is a big projection for the future that in terms of hospitals are very much into that now, the individualized treatment.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm glad you brought up precision medicine. So I think precision medicine and systems biology are big ideas right now, and I think that's the future of medicine. The idea that we can cure chronic illnesses like we cured infections with silver bullets in the previous centuries, it's just not going to happen with chronic illnesses.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know, the studying we start working on genomics and genetics maybe 7 years ago. It's amazing all what I learned in terms of gene regulation, isn't it? The in terms of, and even we have ways to do things right now that they are, but there is a long way to apply to humans, because these treatments are can be invasive and we need to learn much more, isn't it, in terms of doing the translation. But but anyway, so that's I think the future is going to be learning more about genomics and genetics for treatment.
Well, Doctor, you have been very gracious with your time. And as I mentioned, I've been looking forward to this day for 3 years. And I hope that you will find the time in the future to tell us more about your studies. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, great pleasure. And thank you for inviting me.
All right.